For finding your way to Red Wing today. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Scott McMahon. I'm one of the lobbyists at Clarendon Hood. I work primarily on economic development issues for the coalition. I also serve as the executive director of the Greater Minnesota Partnership, which is the coalition's partner organization that brings together local governments, businesses, chambers of commerce, foundations, higher ed to work on issues of housing, child care, broadband, workforce, all the things that your employers are saying that we need. I am excited today to talk with you all on a topic that you've never heard me talk about before, which is child care. I know it's surprising for those of you that have been around to hear me talking child care, but it is still one of the biggest issues that we have in Greater Minnesota. As I've been working the room today, I've heard some great stories about some innovative things that are happening in our communities. So as we move to this next presentation, I encourage you folks that have interesting projects going on to raise them as examples of what we can do on a local level. So it is my honor to introduce our next speaker, which is Erin Bailey. Erin is an assistant commissioner in the Minnesota Management and Budget. She also serves as the executive director for the Children's Cabinet in the Walz administration, which brings together all of the agencies and all the key players across state government that work on issues that impact children throughout Minnesota. So child care, K-12, and so on and so forth. One of the interesting things about child care and why it becomes such a complex issue in Minnesota is on any given issue, we work with Human Services, we work with K-12, we work with higher education, we work with DEED, we work with probably about 12 other agencies that Erin is responsible for kind of herding all the cats together to make sure that everything is getting done here. So when we think about who is the absolute best person in the state of Minnesota to talk about what's going on across state government on child care, we are very fortunate that Erin is here with us today. So with that, Erin, I will welcome you up front.
Thank you.
Do you want this microphone?
Is that working okay? Awesome. I was just joking with my colleagues here that in state government we don't get fancy tools like this very often, so you'll have to bear with me. But I'm delighted to be here. Scott said it better than I could, but I'll just add on briefly. I'm also a parent of 2 kids in childcare, and I'm originally from rural North Dakota, and so have lived and have I think experiences that I'm just eager to hear more about today, and I know that I'll connect with them. So thank you so much for the invitation. Herding cats is definitely a good description of what we do with the Children's Cabinet every day. So looking forward, I think we're really hoping, I'll just start by kind of introducing my colleagues here. Angela Butel, who works on our team, really focused on business supports around early education and childcare, and then Hannah Quinn, who's coordinating the Great Start Task Force, and we'll talk more about that in a second. Our plan for today was to sort of give you a background on what the Children's Cabinet is, talk to you about the state's response to childcare, where we're headed, really hope to leave you with some action steps and partnership that we're hoping to build with you, and then have an opportunity for discussion. I'll just say at the front end, I hope this is a discussion. Please interrupt, please ask questions. If we don't know the right answer, part of our job at the Children's Cabinet is to be that front door, the quarterback, to find that answer for you. So thank you for jumping in and engaging as we move forward. And I should say that Hannah Quinn is a proud resident of grew up in Red Wing. So she's excited. We had a field trip from the Capitol Complex today to be here with you. So this is why a Children's Cabinet exists. This is how families interface with state government. I stole this slide from LA County, but same idea, right? That how families are interfacing with services, how programs are, how communities are, does not flow, it is not person-centered. And so really the idea of a Children's Cabinet is how do you create that alignment, people, data, money, and policy around children and families. I say often to our team, it is so much less about the what, although we're going to do a deep dive in childcare today. It is so much less about that, but more how government is supposed to work. How do we use that muscle to align around people and have our leadership, our structures really focus in on the person. Our Children's Cabinet in Minnesota was kind of generated out of this report in 1992 called the Kids Can't Wait Report, and Governor Carlson, First Lady Carlson chaired this commission. One of the recommendations in this report was to create a Children's Cabinet. Minnesota did that sort of at the time. It was the cute thing to do. About 35 other states around the country created them, and it was how do we center children, make government work. You could delete the dates and the statistics and input updated ones, but much of the themes and work that we need to do is still very visible. in this report. Our cabinet in Minnesota remained dormant for sort of around 20 years, and then many folks know it when Mayor Carter stepped into the role from the Office of Early Learning, a real focus around childcare. When we relaunched via executive order in 2019 when the governor took office, this is a space where he's extremely passionate, education, children, and I'll say as I was reflecting kind of coming down here, you all know this, but so much of sort of your priorities in greater Minnesota are his priorities. I know that this time together in connection with all of you is something that he's really thought deeply about back from his time in Congress, and just was grateful that we were going to be here and have that opportunity to be in partnership and conversation with you all. But via executive order, we added additional agencies to statute. The governor said to me, like, my commissioners can come around a table once a quarter and focus in on kids. So I brought him a list. The statute includes 10 agencies. I brought him a list of about 8 more I wanted to add, and he like threw in 4 more. He's like, I need these folks kind of focused in on kids, and how do we zoom in? I'll talk kind of a little bit more about the governance structure and kind of what we're up to. Here's the idea, really, when I say it's about how we work. The Children's Cabinet really refers to that table of commissioners coming together. I shared with Scott last week, the meeting where 22 commissioners come together, the governor and lieutenant governor chair the conversation, digging in on priorities for the next 6 months, reviewing sort of successes that we've had together. Then we convene a senior leadership team, which is sort of those folks underneath the commissioners. Many of these folks are the people that as you have questions, I would be thinking in my mind, this is who I'm going to want to connect you to, those that are digging in and have that oversight over programs related to childcare and early education. And then we convene cross-agency teams in sort of each of these areas that's under this action teams bucket. I don't know if everyone can see it, but around mental health, housing, educational opportunity, early care and education, what am I missing? Mental health and well-being, food security, and doing some more work in out-of-school time in sort of older youth spaces right now as well. And then we have an advisory council, which includes kind of a mix, county folks, parents, young people who help to inform our work as well. And when we think about sort of how do we do that alignment, we're thinking about how do we have agencies work together to make their administrative levers focus on children. Are we, when Scott's not really joking, you all are living it, around childcare, 6 agencies directly touching how a child care provider gets on board, right? You may have, Hannah and I were kind of brainstorming what questions might have today. We thought we might hear about the fire marshal. I'll see, I got some smirks, yeah. So the fire marshal is at DPS, which is not sort of what you would think about, but how do we get that kind of, that alignment around having conversations together, lifting up policy and budget proposals, creating a focus, aligning the data, presenting that internally and externally. So I'm going to turn it over to Angela here to talk kind of briefly just around the landscape of, okay. I guess I'll say as she gets settled, any like general questions on the Children's Cabinet, what we're up to?
Okay, awesome. So I'll give just a little bit more specific background on the landscape, kind of zooming in from what Erin was sharing about across the Children's Cabinet work to our work specifically within the state level child care and early education landscape. So this slide, I know there's a lot of words up here, you don't really need to read all of them. The point is just that, as Erin was just saying, there are a lot of agencies that are involved in this space that are doing work that touches on children and families looking for childcare, providers trying to get into the world of childcare. So within the Minnesota Department of Education, you know, we have early learning scholarships, we have a variety of early care and education programs, the Department of Human Services, a whole range of services that support families looking for care and support families in additional ways that kind of are related, like mental health services, MFIP, and those sorts of things. We have the Department of Employment and Economic Development, which does child care economic development grants, various types of community planning support, and then the Department of Health and a handful of other agencies. We just mentioned the fire marshal. And so across these agencies, this is kind of bringing the structure that Erin was just describing to bear. In the Children's Cabinet work, we do coordination and convening across those agencies. We do work around metric tracking and alignment around data, which we'll talk about more in a minute. Really bringing in those stakeholder feedback loops. So going out to communities, hearing what they're experiencing, bringing that back in and figuring out where we need to problem solve with them. handful of other ways that we're doing that alignment that we'll dig into more in the coming slides. And then we also, another way that we do interagency coordination in this space is through our preschool development grant, which is a project that really grew out of the Children's Cabinet structure and alignment. It was an opportunity to apply for federal funding to help support some areas that communities had been lifting up as areas of need for investment through the state. So this work really grew out of that, those feedback loops and hearing from communities, and created this strategic plan with the preschool development grant funding to fund things like hubs and other tools to help families navigate through this system, community solutions grants to pilot community rooted local solutions to things and to help test those and then lift them up and expand them. Just ongoing relationship development across communities, and a variety of other more specific supports. And so one thing that also grew out of that is my position actually at the Children's Cabinet. So
I thought you were going to say me.
So my position is funded through that preschool development grant, but housed within the Children's Cabinet team, because it's really, the idea is to kind of draw on these tools of the Children's Cabinet of coordination, convening, bringing partners together around opportunities, but with a focus on the early care and education kind of business side. So what do providers and programs need from a business lens, and how can the state do more to support those pieces? So my position is charged to develop recommendations in that space, supports for childcare businesses, looking at these state processes and structures and how do we align them better. And some examples of ways that I've been doing that work is through the Department of Employment and Economic Development. We did a 6-month childcare sprint focused on a lot of these questions, and put together some recommendations. Recently brought together a group of stakeholders to apply for a pilot opportunity to develop an apprenticeship program for early care and education. And then some work around childcare access and opportunity mapping to across agencies, figure out what data do we have, how do we bring it together, and identify ways that we can better focus our supports and our efforts where there's the greatest need. I think with that, I'm going to hand it back over to Erin to talk a little bit more about the landscape of children and families.
Any questions for Angela on that position? She's an incredible resource for you all in the community, so I'll make sure you have all of our contact information, but I think really thinking about that business lens was a huge learning during COVID, that we could provide all these supports, great partnerships, but if at the end of the day the business of keeping a program up and running wasn't working, it didn't really matter. So how do we kind of think about creating that specific capacity and partnership in our work? So when we talk about childcare, early learning, I think a really important question is like, who are we talking about? How many people? These are sort of the kind of high-level numbers about who are the kids under 5 in Minnesota. 1 in 4 children are under the age of 5. About a third of those children are children of color or indigenous kids. 98% in low-income households have at least one adult who worked in the past year. We have a really high rate of employment in Minnesota of both moms and 2-parent households. So we have this additional sort of need on childcare here. 1 in 8 children, 0 to 8, live in a low-income household. And I said, sort of reference the statistic on the bottom, that 76% of children under 6 have all of their parents in the workforce. This is normally sort of in the top 5 of states. I think we might be, and looking at them to confirm, like 2 or 3 right now. We have, so we're kind of, these top numbers are licensed childcare settings, and we know many families use family, friend, and neighbor as well. My kids are in a licensed setting today. They're with my father-in-law, so that could be considered family, friend, and neighbor on Wednesdays. But so we have about 1,800 licensed childcare centers, 6,400 licensed family childcare programs. Certified childcare centers are those centers that are certified to receive childcare assistance. It's really interesting in Minnesota when we think about programs that serve sort of older kids out of school time programs. We learned this during COVID. It's really hard to know who those programs are. The way that we know is whether or not they're certified to receive CCAP. 219 school-based voluntary pre-K and school readiness programs, 330 independent social or special school districts, and then I kind of reference family, friend, and neighbor care. I'm curious as we dig into discussion here, kind of what is bubbling up for you. Obviously, family childcare providers play a huge role in Greater Minnesota, and it's a space where we really tried to kind of dig in during COVID and make sure that our supports kind of overcompensated for that need, but the trends and need in Greater Minnesota related to family child care have existed for quite some time and are continuing to intensify. And so it's space where we spend a fair amount of time. We're now sort of convening a group of family child care providers monthly to have really that partnership discussion with them. What are you experiencing? What do you need? How do we, to Angela's point, troubleshoot some of these specific needs? This is the right side of the slide of kids and where they land. So it's kind of just over half of kids that are landing in those licensed settings across the state. And the majority of them, you can see the majority of the capacity here is in licensed center care and then family. And then, like I said, the certified centers are often those sort of older kid spaces. This map is a map of access, and I don't have to tell you, I don't think about the strains on the market and continued need. You'll see kind of on the bottom some data where we know that we lost capacity. This is population versus licensed capacity, so it is adjusted for population size. And then really we hear about access related to cost, location, transportation, hours of care. General Mankey from Military Affairs has sort of continued to talk to me about that after hours care in Greater Minnesota and that the need on weekends related to the National Guard Service and how important that is. And so kind of really lasering in on what are those specific areas, not just about the larger number, but what's happening in the market. And I think, you know, the important part of this slide is I think that the governor and lieutenant governor have prioritized a ton of resources and attention, and we have that support to really dig in. And we know that these needs are enormous and so much more work is needed. And so again, that's why I'm excited to be here with you today to hear more of those stories. So what do we hear when we're in dialogue with providers and community? We hear that sure, there's a need for these continued short-term. That the state's done a great job at providing short-term supports, but we're trying to solve long-term problems with short-term supports. And what is that larger plan and vision going to look like? And resources need to be long-term. Workforce is huge. I'm sure you all are experiencing it in your community. Hiring and retention. And I think the piece that's, sorry, it's a non-COVID cough. I've tested many times, living with 2 5-year-olds, kids under 5, so living the dream over here. Is that consistency and stability for kids, and I almost like can't talk about this without crying because I've lived through it as teachers are moving through classrooms with my own kids. But that addition to just the need to keep programs open is that connection point and bonding that our young kids have with their educators, and how do we think about zoning in and doubling down on that here in terms of workforce in the system. Childcare is really expensive. It's expensive for families. It's expensive for parents. Hannah may talk about a bit as she talks about the task force, the work that they're doing on what does affordability mean and how do we come to sort of agreement on what affordability is. But the challenge is that, you know, I think you may hear childcare providers say like we're subsidizing the system on the back of the educators, that they're very low compensated professions. The margins are very slim, and so the only thing that you can do, I just got a notice this month that our child care is going up 3% as a result of inflation. The way to make up is to increase your tuition on families, and it's a very difficult cycle. I would argue a broken market, and that I talked about this a little bit. We continue to hear these sort of what is needed, location, hours, language, culture. Are the programs that are accessible actually accessible to families? Are they meeting their needs? Really, we've continued to hear increased needs around the mental health of children, families, and providers, and is that system equipped to meet kids and families where they are, especially coming out of sort of a global pandemic and a racial reckoning in our state? And then the continued need for enhanced state and local coordination. And I would say Angela talked a bit about sort of going out and getting feedback. I think one of the tools that I've learned that we have in state government is bringing that feedback, bringing all of you, for instance, if you'd like to do it, to those kind of policy leaders at agencies and have them hear directly from providers. Okay, we feel really good about ourselves because we're running this program. Let's hear how that actually feels and how do we use that as a tool to really work hard on creating more virtual training options, which is a huge need we hear from child providers in Greater Minnesota. Why am I driving 4 hours for a training that is updated and great, but I had a similar one 3 years ago. This is a huge amount of time and resources of mine. So small to big issues, how do we bring those voices directly to our partners in state government to work through? So what is that state government response? The governor sat down with Governor O'Malley when he first took office. It's never really been done in Minnesota before to have a strategic plan for the state, but that was something that Governor Walz and Lieutenant Governor Flanagan really believed in. And so they launched a One Minnesota plan, and one of the very specific goals in that is childcare and early education. And using results-based accountability, it's the idea that we can have all of these sort of deliverables and outcomes, but we have to be able to have population-level results to drive our agencies to. So using results-based accountability, we dig into this goal around childcare and early education with the governor's office quarterly with our agency partners with this goal of increasing family access to care. Here is sort of a map of who's at that table of our action team, and we are working right now with Commissioner Mueller and Commissioner Harpstead of Department of Human Services and Education to really sort of formalize what that exact coordination is going to look like so that for the foreseeable future that work can continue. It includes 10 agencies, and when we think about what is the lever that we have sort of without legislative action, what is the levers that we have to make government work better for people? It's that community engagement, communications, eligibility and service coordination, finance structures, governance, and workforce. We're going to talk about the vision legislatively and the funding needs in a second, but just really being clear about there are pieces that we can do better now, today, and we need to come together and be working on it each and every day to work through those action steps, and that's the goal of that team. And this, I'm not going to read through all these, I'm happy to share slides if folks are interested in them, but these are examples of what those coordination opportunities look like. One of them I'll call out, we hear a lot about regulatory reform, licensing complexity. So you'll see sort of the third bucket from the bottom. That's a proactive project that the Department of Human Services has underway right now to hear feedback about what are those regulatory pieces that are standing in the way and how do we modernize that. And so actively sort of working through that as we go. The third bullet on here I'll call out too, called Wayfinder. We've had just great feedback in partnership with providers. Our colleague Jenny always says the best part about working with childcare providers is they come to the table with solutions. They have ideas every meeting, like, what about this? What about that? And one of those has just been like, what is that clear front door? And when somebody wants to get a program online, how do we knock down every barrier and come around them to help get that childcare provider up online? And so that's really what Wayfinder and sort of this one-stop effort is all about. Many of you might be familiar with the DEED grants. They were created 2017 pilot program, I think. Okay, and then additional resources in 2021. The grant is open now, so we're going to have the contact information at the end here, but you should encourage programs in your community to apply. But currently there are 14 awards from the 2022 projects and an estimated increase of 2,300 childcare slots coming online as a result of these partnerships. Anything I should add on here? You two? No? Okay. All right. I'm going to let Hannah talk about the task force.
Thanks, Erin, and hi everybody. I'm Hannah Quinn. I'm the the coordinator for the Great Start for All Minnesota Children Task Force, which is quite the mouthful. And I, as Erin said, I grew up here in Red Wing, so I'm happy to be back in my hometown for work. So the task force is an effort that came out of the 2021 legislative session, and it is a group of 15 voting members and 22 non-voting members, so 37 total folks around the table who meet monthly around the goals that you see here on the screen. So it was prescribed in legislation that the task force needs to develop a plan and implementation timeline that ensures all families have access to affordable, high-quality early care and education that enriches, nurtures, and supports children and their families. And we've got kind of 3 prongs coming out of that. Focus on affordability, both for families, but also on the provider side, making sure it works from the business end. We've got accessibility, so to Erin and Angela's points earlier, ensuring a child's access to high quality early care and education is not determined by race, family, income, or zip code. And then a supported workforce, so making sure that Minnesota's early care and education educators are qualified, diverse, supported, and equitably compensated regardless of setting. And obviously those 3 things are often linked in a complicated web, and we're trying to tease them out in a way to develop this plan made up of recommendations that can be implemented by many actors throughout the state, including local governments and the state legislature, as well as the governor and others. So we meet monthly virtually as a group. We've got geographic diversity in the team, so that's one nice thing of these virtual meetings that have sprung out, is that you can have a really productive conversation in that virtual setting. So we meet monthly to discuss recommendations and vote on them, and they will end up as a draft plan that we'll submit to the legislature and the governor in December, and then a final plan in February of next year. So, and we've been meeting just since November of last year, so it's just over a year-long project with a lot to get done there. And all of our meetings are public, and we love public input and want to seek it out as much as possible, so would love to hear from you and the folks in your communities about needs, ideas, and potential changes that could be made. As Erin said, we hear a lot of really great solutions coming out of communities themselves, and that's what we want to hear. And in the area of our charge, we also have working groups focused directly on affordability and on workforce compensation and support. So really an extra focus on those two areas, which are big problems to solve. So I'll just flash up who our voting members are, so you can just get a sense. We've got parents, we've got licensed child care center teachers and directors, we've got family child care providers, and we've got 4 legislators who serve on the task force as well. Everyone whose name is underlined lives in Greater Minnesota, and the names with the asterisks serve as our co-chairs. And then we've also got a large group of 22 non-voting members who represent various organizations and departments of state government, including the Department of Labor and Human Services, but we've also got Minnesota Head Start Association, we've got the Chamber of Commerce and the Minnesota Business Partnership represented. So it's just a really great group that is coming together to find solutions, and we'd love to hear from you, and we'll have contact information later. And I'll pass it back to Erin.
I think what's really important to remember about the task force too is this is a legislative directive to us and to the Children's Cabinet to own the creation of this report that would serve as a North Star and an implementation plan for how do we address this large, complex problem, how do we come to some consensus about what is needed. And so I think that feedback component and your partnership, and then what happens with that moving forward at the legislature, how do we gain support for the resources that are needed to then implement that plan, that dialogue is going to be really important. So we would love to hear from you on it. I'm going to transition just a tiny bit to talk about the legislative wins and priorities and what is the state vision and where are we trying to go. So this term we've had huge historic wins for childcare and early education, and I think sometimes, especially coming out of last session where I'll talk about what our package was and we loved it so much and spent so much time selling it, it's hard to not feel down about it, but to remember these huge wins that we've had, that we increased child care assistance rates, 40th percentile for infants, 30th percentile for school-age children. We increased investment in the BSF rate. So these are just huge improvements and investments in the child care assistance program. Minnesota ranked near the bottom in terms of reinvestment. It was on the edge of being fined by the federal government for not increasing our rates into this program. And so this action was necessary for a variety of reasons and to not leave money on the table. And we continue to have money at the state that could be spent to increase those rates, but need legislative action in order to do that. So there's money on the bottom line that is held essentially waiting for that legislative action to continue to increase rates, and really with that goal of how do we get to the 75th percentile was in our budget proposal. Dedicating specific resources from the ARP to the childcare industry, kind of a variety of projects that were underway related to reimbursement. We talked about the regulation modernization effort and the deed grants. The Family Child Care Task Force was created, and almost all of those recommendations were implemented, and I'm really proud of the partnership that went into place to create many of these sort of deliverables. The 4,000 voluntary pre-K seats were maintained. I'll say we have on our own Children's Cabinet Advisory Council 1 or 2 representatives from Minnesota Initiative Foundations, and this is space where those voices in some communities, knowing that the voluntary pre-K seats are the answer in some greater Minnesota communities, and really needing to maintain those programs. And then expanding and improving the post-secondary child care grant program. I'll touch on, many folks kind of know about the resources related to COVID, but I like the team really leaned in here, and I mean team in the biggest definition possible, from community leaders to providers, to private sector organizations. We had partnerships with breweries to get hand sanitizer out to childcare providers, masks, companies that put together shields where we were able to get to kids who have disabilities who couldn't have cloth masks in the room but needed to see mouths. And Minnesota dedicated over $900 million directly into childcare, kind of one of the most per capita in the country. That was, we put in both first these peacetime emergency grants and then public health supports funding. That funding went on to be modeled nationally into the stabilization grants that we have now. We worked really closely with the federal delegation on that COVID relief package that passed, that then really used the learnings from our own program to create a nationwide program that was specific, sort of dedicated funding to providers every month to be able to keep them open and operating. We were the first state to launch a testing program for staff and kids, and to prioritize educators in the vaccine program. Just learned a lot too about communication. We did weekly, then bi-weekly, monthly, all different kinds of calls where we were like hearing directly from providers, and working then directly with hospitals to partner families with where open providers were. We did, it's like I forget about it, but there was a price gouging time and a time where you could only get so many toilet paper. There was a point where providers were like, I can't stay open because the grocery store is only letting me get 1 case of toilet paper and I need more toilet paper. So it was like, how do we have an executive order to try to sort of prevent that from happening in our education systems? But we also just worked in partnership with business, got on the phone with Cub Foods, launched a huge program for us that helped create services open. Costco was responsive, just sort of a lot of these really individual relationships banding together. I talked sort of a bit about some of the COVID relief dollars that came out. I'm happy some of you might have questions on that. And so really quick, broad-reaching action to try to support the sector, create continue long-term trends around need. I'll say this map is from sort of right in the middle of COVID, and you'll see where our other states were, and some still are, in terms of permanent closures. So the dark blue is less than 25% of providers lost. Some of those states lost more than 75% of their childcare providers. Many states, the majority, lost between 25 and 75% of their childcare providers during COVID. So I think one of the things that we try to lean into is we should feel proud of the work and where we are, that we're in a better spot than other states, but that in no way, I don't think it feels that way to providers, doesn't feel that way to us, I'm guessing doesn't feel that way to you, about actions that need to be taken. And how do we put, kind of back to that theme I talked about earlier, short-term and long-term supports, that we need to be continuing to provide these short-term supports, but understanding that these are long-term trends and long-term problems that are going to require continued partnership. And really good transition to sort of the budget that we put forward last year. I can't speak to what the governor's budget will be next year, but I think really, you know, our goal is, I'd love feedback from you all here today about what's missing in this as we think about and dig in on what's to come. The governor's budget, supplemental budget proposal, was a historic investment in kids. It's my job to put that together, so I'm proud of it. $5.1 billion invested in kids and families, ranging from, you see on this graphic, sort of what were the buckets, what were we hearing from families, from communities about what the needs are. The biggest chunk of that was in early childhood. 2.6 on sort of early childhood generally. Think about home visiting, housing supports. We can identify in our systems when families are unstably housed. We know they might qualify for early learning scholarships or CCAP because they are unstably housed, but then we don't have any resources to address the housing problem. So one of the proposals was direct rental assistance to families when we know that they are experiencing that need. And then really zoning in on that mixed delivery childcare and early education was a $1 billion package. So really the crux of the governor's budget in this space. That was direct funding that would have funded an additional 50,000 children into childcare and early learning by fully funding CCAP, expanding eligibility, $75 million into early learning scholarships. That was essentially doubling the base of what's currently in there for early learning scholarships. And then an expanded mixed delivery pre-K program. I'm guessing you may hear, maybe you don't, but you may hear about sort of contention about that mixed delivery in general and sort of pre-K and the tension with childcare providers. This was the first mixed delivery proposal that has been put forward in Minnesota. It's a 40-30-30 split. So 40% in school districts, 30% in licensed childcare centers, 30% in family childcare. Did I get that right? Or Head Start? No. 30% in licensed childcare, 30% in Head Start. So, and really trying to create, and I think this is a proposal that if you hear in your communities, we would love to hear the good, bad, and ugly, because it needs to be continued to refine. Like I said, it's the first, and we really modeled it off sort of bipartisan conversations in DC, but I just want to echo the point, because I hear childcare providers say, well, it'll take resources from us, and really this is the first time where we are really trying to do the opposite, create teeth to fund that system in the setting that works best for the community and for the family. I'm going to skip through some of these pieces, but I talked a bit about some of these additional kind of proposals in the early childhood space. And additional coordination. This was also in just a number of proposals in the budget related to kids and families, and how do we increase. One piece that I've been really excited about, and we're trying to move it without legislative funding, but is really thinking about technology solutions across agencies. So we're rolling out to school districts right now. This is not specific to childcare, but we're in the process right now of rolling out a project into school districts to use Medicaid information for free and reduced lunch in schools. And that is going to increase dramatically, more than double the number of kids who are directly certified, which will lead to increased revenue for school districts, all of yours, I'm sure. And it will mean fewer barriers for kids and families. So if you're working in partnership with schools in your community, you'll hear about the frustration they have with families, getting those forms back from families. Directly certifying them eliminates all of that. It says, okay, we already know that this family qualifies. We're going to make sure that school districts have access to that information. And so it's additional resources for families and for districts, just a huge win, and what's possible when we think about across the enterprise IT solutions. So this is kind of where we want to turn it to. I'm happy to take questions before we dig in, but when I think about having the opportunity to chat with all of you, the governor during the end of session negotiations heard clear multiple times from a few of his partners in the legislature that they don't hear about childcare. They don't know it's a priority. They didn't want to see it in the budget. And that's like truly what this like tension point that we have in our work every day. We know that resources are needed. We're in dialogue, we're working in partnership, and those resources are absolutely critical. And we need your help telling those stories to legislators across the state. And we are very open to feedback and working in partnership to understand what those proposals will. I will say, like I said at the very beginning, I think being raised in rural North Dakota, being a parent of 2 young kids, being a child of a single mom, I have lived across my life spectrum the needs of this system and how we need to work together differently. And I think I would say on behalf of the governor and lieutenant governor, we want to leave no stone unturned to have open conversation about how we solve these problems together. And we need folks to be willing to come to the table and say that it's a priority and we want to work on it. And so we need your help in that as much as possible. As you're having meetings with your legislators, to say, hey, I want you to know that I'm hearing about this issue. I want you to know that this program's struggling. And in the meantime, We'll all leave here today with our email and phone number, and I promise that we'll get back to you. I say often I'm like a heat-seeking missile and intense with my email. Like, I will get back to you. We will try to find an answer, but at the end of the day, this is a resource challenge that we can only solve with legislative action. I just, again, want to call upon the proposals for the deed grant. We have the, I think it's at the end. We can send it out. How to submit those proposals and share the website. Continue to connect with First Children's Finance. I know Scott had shared that many of you have connect and make those connections in solving problems, but another good resource. Share feedback or share the task force information with your communities this is like the opportunity where the legislature said we want to know what the plan should be, so we want that to be informed by feedback from all of you. And then, as I said, continue to reach out to us. It's childrenscabinet.mmb@state.mn.us, and my email you all have. It's the same format, erin.bailey@state.mn.us, but we can share it all out in slides too, and hope that we can count on you. I'll pause and take questions. We have are hoping we have a little bit of time to kind of provide you all with questions too, to get feedback. We have some handouts we would pass out if we've got some table time questions from you, but I'll pause first and see if you've got questions for us on the yeah, jump in.
How do we address infrastructural deficiencies for infant care needs in rural Minnesota? Nobody can make a profit based on the fact that whether they want to open a daycare, if they don't have a facilitator, a church program, a YMCA or something to do that facility-wise, they can't make any money. Many of our schools are starting pre-K 4-year-old programs for all day, which is taking the gravy money out of a daycare. We have care facilities in a shift town, multi-diverse in Worthington, Minnesota, that is losing the money profit that they can make because it takes so much to care for infants. If you're a mother thinking that you're going to continue to work and you want to have a child, you better find a daycare before you even think of conceiving a child.
I was 6 weeks pregnant when I got my slot. I
Yeah.
think they know second to my husband and my OB maybe.
The problem is you
Yeah.
can't find infant care, and you can't go out that far, and we are losing workers because of that. The schools with the pre-K programs for 4-year-olds and all day are taking away the profit that daycares or facilities currently have, but they can't take any more infants because the facility needs call for too much, and finding workers to take the child to provider ratio is crippling our communities as far as workers. Many of the employers have accepted the fact that they have to raise pay or supplement child care costs to get workers to come, but we can't find places to put our infants. It's not the toddlers, it's the infant care and the infrastructural needs and the demands that are put on that you can't even cash flow a facility unless you have a supplemental provider with you, like a church group or a YMCA or something of that nonprofit nature. So how do we get help for in-home or providers who are willing to work in a facility to make the infrastructural needs to care for more infants?
I mean, it's a great question. I think I can answer in terms of proposals that we've had forward. I think additional resources are necessary. We've worked on some creative partnerships across the state in terms of financing facilities, but I think all of those programs are not adequately funded. And so, I mean, like I said, I believe this is a resource question. And I think developing, I don't know, Hannah, if there's any specific feedback that you've heard. Is it gonna be way louder now?
Hopefully.
If there's any other feedback and sharing that either of you have heard that you want to share. I mean, what you've talked about is like all day, every day. So.
We know.
Yeah, I know. So I think how do we work?
You've got a lot of great programs going on, but that's not really.
They're not enough.
Those aren't the problems that we're seeing in extreme outstate Minnesota. It's not that.
Well, I think the facility, I mean, there are a number of proposals that we've put forward around space and needs and flexible. There's a specific piece that was in our proposal that wasn't up here from DHS related to the facility component. And the IRRB, we've worked in partnership with them on sort of like a number of facility spaces. I think the infant care is it. I mean, that's why we've prioritized the reimbursement rates and those, that's why it was what was passed in 21 was the prioritization there. But additional resources are needed. And like I said, I can talk about all the pieces that we're able to do at a state level, and we need that partnership. I think we need to have that conversation in partnership with you, with the legislature.
So got a couple problems, so hopefully a couple potential solutions to consider for them. So I work with workforce development here in Red Wing and Wabasha, and so we hear all the time, I can't get a job because I can't find one that would pay enough for me to do childcare. But we also hear from people who are trying to start child cares and the challenges they run into especially in our rural areas. The online training is fantastic for getting the knowledge out to them, but it creates an unintentional barrier with some of the rural areas where they might not have a computer and they might not already have internet service set up. The current grant programs available to them through organizations like Families First and a few others are structured so that they have to buy all that first and then they get reimbursed. But the challenge is I haven't started my business. I don't have the money to be buying computers and those other things. Potentially some tweaks in some of those grant structures or funding setups to where they could get that very initial piece started to make a big difference. We know of several instances of people who, because they didn't already have a computer and internet and they couldn't afford to get it themselves, they had to pass on taking that path for their starting their own business. So if that little hurdle.
No, I think that's super helpful. And if you have specific examples and stories, I would love for you to share them. They'd be very powerful. I think we're always looking for those. I mean, I think I'll just like speak for myself. My belief is that our entire and kind of the genesis of Angela's position, as she described, is when an individual or team or community wants to start a childcare provider, we should all run to them and say, what are all the things that you need and how do we align and make that work? And that's really that vision for One Stop and Wayfinder, which is getting moving. But it needs to be stronger and better and faster. And so I think I would pledge to you to like dig in on the individual cases and try to help. And I think the stories would be hugely helpful for us. Both when it's not working and when it is working to lift up.
Perfect. I got one more thing to toss out. In this area, we have some really fantastic larger employers who have acknowledged the infrastructure challenges, and they're saying, hey, we will subsidize whatever we need, but we know we need new daycares, not extra funding for some of the current ones. That's still important. But they're like, we make shoes, we make food processing equipment. We don't know how to run a daycare. So they have the resources, they have the interest, they know the need, but they're looking for a template, a path. What is a way that we as a larger employer invested in our community could help develop or generate a child care? We're working on some efforts to organize that with a few employers out here, but if there are more examples sent directly to them, or if there's even a slightly suggested roadmap for taking that path, that would make a huge difference.
This was the sprint. Angela, do you want to take this? Sure. There are examples that we're happy to connect you with, and so do you want to take it?
Yeah, so I mentioned very briefly when I was talking that the Department of Employment and Economic Development sponsored a 6-month sprint project that brought together several state agencies to look into kind of economic development intersections with childcare, and this was one of the big questions we talked about was, we know there are employers that are interested in participating in this space and helping, and how do we partner with them better. You may already know or be connected to, but the Itasca Project group is doing some work around this, bringing together employers to share kind of best practices, and they're putting together an employer toolkit. I haven't checked super recently about that, but I know they were kind of on the verge. It is up. Okay, so that if you go to the Itasca Project website, they should have some examples there. And then, yes, if you want to reach out and connect with us, we can definitely share other examples we connected with through the sprint process. We talked to a number of employers that had either created on-site childcare or found a way to partner with existing childcare in their communities.
Thank you.
Erin, we're off both microphones for the time being.
I can be very loud. I'm a farm kid.
I have a question. I'm Carrie Johnson from down in the pit. St. Peter. Hopefully you can hear me. This is an issue that's near and dear to my heart. I have served on the board of a child care center for many years. I have a 5-year-old in a child care center currently. One thing I've noticed in the past couple of years with the turnover issue is this turnover in directors, turnover in staff, and how that impacts the ability to meet regulatory requirements, documentation, training, all of those things that are so important for stability and safety of the kids. And so while we wait for legislators to take this issue on and take a fresh look at it for ease in licensing and looking at the regulations, are there some existing supports and resources for these child care centers and family providers? You know, because we have this, you might have a director who just started, and then they leave in a year, and then you have a new one, And so is there support and resources that sort of address getting these childcare centers up to speed? There are some resources for family childcare providers with some of the foundations, but not necessarily the childcare centers.
Yeah, I think it's a great, I mean, I share that. I was trying to think as you were talking how many directors my program has been through in the last, in the COVID times. We work hand in hand with the licensing division at DHS and also sort of connected with the county licensor. So for, I'm sure you all know, but county licensors do family child care and the state license centers. And to try to really culture shift that mindset of this isn't about penalizing programs, but how do we work in partnership to the point about getting programs up. Our whole focus should be how we help them succeed because our economy and our future depends on it. So there are resources. I would say reach out if there are specific programs that you're working with, and I think it's really important for us to take that feedback back to licensing too, to say here's one of the pieces that we're hearing. Can you hear me? Is it working? Should I just give up? Because I think that is critically important. Part of that licensing modernization project that I mentioned is doing that too, to be able to say, rather than sort of fining, how do we have almost like a 2-level system where there's a real violation and then there's a violation where this is an educational moment. This is an opportunity to help them understand what's needed. So I think I appreciate the point, and I think carrying back the importance of education connections and then us being proactive across licensors in, and many, I think sometimes the licensors get a little bit of a bad rap. Most of them were former directors or educators in programs, and so how do we equip them with those tools and connections to be able to do that as well. But it's great feedback.
Licensors are oftentimes very helpful, it's just they don't always have the time to educate, especially when there's such high turnover. So I think just any resources we can bring back to communities for family child care providers and centers to help support them and set them up for success, aside from talking to legislators and I think is
well, and I hope they're connected with their child care resource and referral agencies too in the community. So there's a network of resource and referral agencies that are funded by the state who should be doing that TA and working in partnership on helping through and are in charge in many cases of the training that's relevant. So if that connection isn't solid, we need to fix that too.
Not because of the turnover.
Yeah. Like how do we? That's I think a really good piece to bring back about like thinking of the frequency of the proactive outreach too, understanding that the staff, how do we address the need for, how do we stop the turnover, right? And help support folks being able to stay in the careers over long term, but then at the same time, thank you. I appreciate you lifting it up.
One quick plug up that Erin mentioned, the licensure modernization task force process. I serve on that, and our good friend Scott Marquardt from the Southwest Initiative Foundation serves on that. So if there are conversations in your communities that you want to get plugged into that process, please give me a call because I want to make sure that we get that information brought over that group to do what we can do.
Angela, I don't think we're gonna have time.
I thought if people have, if you have written feedback that we didn't get to and you want to grab one of these pages, we'll collect them.
Yeah.
Hi, my name is John Rademacher, City Administrator in Little Falls, and like you look the same or similar out here, and I want to applaud this work for what's happened. Because 7 years ago, we were in a similar meeting to this with this group, and we were only talking about the problems, and nobody was talking about the solutions, and nobody at the state was present for any of that conversation. So I want to give big thanks to you and your team for things that are happening, because a lot of what's up there are things that we've talked about over the years and we've been working on this issue. If you want to ask, Scott knows, because I've been at the Capitol testified dozens of times. But I three things that I want to address: the turnover on the providers. One thing that we're hearing in our area with those providers is access to benefits, either health insurance or retirement plans. It's incredibly difficult for providers to have access to any of those because they're so cost prohibitive. I don't know if there's anything at the state level where we can create tools or access for tools for providers to be able to address those efforts. I know I worked with an Initiative Foundation for our area, and they looked into that and trying to host it themselves and found it was statutorily not, they were legally not able to.
What's your MIF again? Which one?
Initiative Foundation.
Is that Nancy or Lynn? The Don. I can't remember which one. Who?
Don Hickman.
Yeah. So Don, Nancy, and Lynn and I and Angela dug deep and came up with some potential solutions that would require legislative action, but also roadmaps of how do we share those resources. I mean, it's a huge theme that we're hearing, so I appreciate you lifting it up. Yeah.
To keep pressing on that, I think that would be huge to help and benefit in the long-term retention side of it. I think you're on track with the CCAP and the reimbursement issues. I really want to caution that you need to help and support those families and providers on how to access those benefits. In Little Falls and Morrison County, we are not accessing the full level of those benefits that we have, and we're one of the lowest income counties in the state. So it's just either they don't know about it, they don't know how to access it, or it's too time consuming for them to address that. So they're out there, but they're not being taken advantage of.
Do you think it's mostly scholarships or CCAP too? Both?
It's both.
Okay.
It's both. And I forgot where we are in the last one, but we've been working on the capital issues for a long time, and that's I applaud again the access to the grants. We actually are receiving $1.5 million in federal funding to help with that, but that is again what we had. We applied for that starting back in January 2021. What we thought we could get in child care slots for $1.5 million is now less than half. So those capital dollars just aren't accessible fast enough to get these things and solutions done in our community. So it's just it is part of the solution, but really we have to fix the broken market on the rates and affordability and access to those benefits. So you're on the right track with what we have in boosting that. And I really want to say again on the mixed delivery model and those reimbursements that are incredibly important. That just died. It had no possible life for universal pre-K, all done in school settings. That was never going to fly in Greater Minnesota. Those are not the solutions that.
And that's not what we proposed.
No,
I don't know if I properly emphasize it enough.
No, that's from.
I get that talking point back. We can't have user. I'm we did not propose that.
Yeah,
I know.
That's 10 years ago. Stuff.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
that just.
The wounds are deep.
Yeah, and that just really, I think, set everything back and in terms of that relationship and what we accomplished. So.
Well, I appreciate those. It's all good feedback, and I'll just say to the point about kind of the capital and those needs. I meant what I said about we will contort ourselves into any way to work in partnership with any of you and legislators in your community to get I think resources in this area. At the end of the last budget was where the governor sort of laid down and was we have to solve this problem, and we have to have partners in the legislature that believe it's a problem in order to be solved. And there is a wide range of sort of steps across what that plan could be and what those investments could be, and we genuinely want to build them in partnership.
Honestly, the solutions are economic impact developments in our community. Access to available workforce is really tied up in the accessibility of childcare for those families and those people that could go into the workforce. That is one of the biggest
millions of people
available to us to be put in, to fill these jobs.
Totally. Yeah.
Thank you.
Totally. Thank you.
So I'm the city of New Ulm, city manager, and this is going to be a weird comment. We look at. So I'm originally from California, so I have a very different perspective on childcare, and we're all in this room, and the common thread is that childcare is too expensive. I look at it, it's not expensive enough because they're businesses, and we treat them like schools, we treat them like businesses. They can't be both. They have to be one or the other. And if they're a business, we have to allow them to make money, and they're not profitable. So what is that? Is that about a 5 ratio so they get one more infant, or is that looking at allowing them to charge? And I'll use me as an example. When I was in California, I was paying $120 a day. I'm currently paying $135 a week. With that $120 a day, I had to provide the diapers, I had to bring some food, I had to do a lot of things. For $130 a week, I get everything. And again, I know that's not affordable for everyone, and it doesn't have to be $120. Charging $200 a week, it makes it a little bit more profitable for everyone across the board. But if we keep on saying the narrative that it's too expensive, they're never going to be treated as a business. And I look at it, if you hire your neighbor to come and watch your kid for 2 hours, what are you paying them? $30, you're paying them $15 an hour. I think daycare providers are making $2-3 an hour. So kid in high school is making more than a child care provider who has an education and taking care of kids. It's what's that balance? And I know there's something across those lines, but if we're going to treat them like a school, let's fund them. You know, we have a tax that you can levy from the public to address those needs, or treat them like a business and allow them to make money. So,
Yeah, you're not going to hear any argument from me on that last comment. I think, and you know, we had some partnerships with, was it the Women's Venture Fund and First Children's Finance during COVID when they like said exactly that. Like these programs will not make it if they don't raise their rates. So when I gave my example of like my program giving August or tuition's going up, I'm like, good on you. Like you gotta, but I think the reality, you know, each provider, family, community, it is not the case everywhere. I pay more than $130 a week for mine.
All right, we have time for one last question here, and then we'll let Erin and Drew go back on the road. But as we're wrapping up here, they did pass out the forms. Feel free to, over the next 2 days, to fill those out, get them back to me.
Cool.
And I'll
Thanks,
make sure to
Matt.
get back to Erin and her team as we wrap up the conference.
Just a plug for the Deed grant. I think this would be in line with it. I caught most of the webinar, but it's on Deed's website. I'm sure if you Google Minnesota Deed for Child Care, you get some slides. But we did a program in Wabasha that has been successful so far, and I think it's because it lacks complexity entirely, and that sort of speaks to what you were saying. We had a long-standing conversation with Families First of Minnesota and First Children's Finance. They were very informative, and one of the things they suggested right from the get-go is just develop a grant program, put $10,000 in it, whether it comes from your PDA, or in our case, a Port Authority, and make small grants to these child care providers. Their costs are going up. They need these small incentives, and they just can't be too encumbered. So I proposed that several years back, and it wasn't met with resistance, but it didn't even get a motion in the Port Authority. I think people thought, how can $2,000 make a difference? Well, finally, we decided to direct some ARPA funds there, and it has been absolutely received very well. And it's as simple as this. I mean, this is literally one of the applications. I need a new dishwasher to wash all the dishes for my children's meals because I'm on the food program. Approved. I mean, it's really has to be that easy. And so far, we've had 3 existing providers, and now we have 4 people on the path to licensure who are going to also apply. So that's big progress for us. I mean, our schools are our only centers, so pre-K, preschool programs are our centers, but otherwise we have 9 licensed providers. So if one of those providers is incentivized to work somewhere else for a better, economic opportunity, we've lost more than 10% of the spots in our community. So we've heard it from our employers, obviously, and I think that's how you make the case, but just create a small and simple solution to a problem that isn't that complex for them. And if you want to steal that idea and apply for the Deed grant, you can just take it verbatim right off the City of Wabasha's website and administer those kind of dollars to your providers.
Well, and some of the facilities funding that are available are limited to units of government versus like private business, right? So some examples of success when I think to share are where governments or school districts or local governments have been the applicant to the facility funding and then built that partnership with the provider directly. So, all right.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Erin and team. We appreciate you guys taking the time to come down to Red Wing today. We appreciate your efforts on these issues. As I think you can tell from the conversation here, this is a high priority for our communities. They want to be partners on it. They want to help figure out what the solutions are. They want to do the test labs to figure out what we can do. Use us. I think every year I keep hearing a louder and louder call from our cities toward this issue. For our city folks, I do have an ask for all of you. You know that this is an issue. You know that this is a major issue in your communities, for your employers, for your workforce, and so on and so forth. As I started today, Bradley commented about how at times our Republicans are our friends, at times our Democrats are our friends on different issues we work on. This is an area in which our Greater Minnesota legislators need to hear more from us and from our employers on. Right now at the Capitol, and I'm going to get political here for a minute, to boil it down, the conversation on child care at the Capitol is Republicans arguing that it's a regulation issue, Democrats arguing that it's a fiscal issue. They're both right and they're both wrong. It's regulation, it's fiscal, it's all of it. We need to change the conversation we have going on politics if we're going to fix this issue. We need to have Republicans talking about the importance of CCAP and scholarships as a way of financing the programs. We need to have the Democrats realizing that we need some different solutions in Greater Minnesota than they need in the metros. When we talk about the Greater Minnesota Child Care Facilities Grant Program, that's part of our solution. It may not be part of the metro solution, but as you can hear from everybody in the room here, capital costs at facilities are probably the biggest demand that we have in Greater Minnesota. So when you leave here on Friday, drive back to your community, go fishing for the weekend, and then come on Monday and call your local candidates and say, hey, let's take childcare seriously because our local economies depend on it. So with that, thank you all.